see the break screen. So, am I up?
Yeah, I just.
Okay, good. Excellent. Okay. Next, we have Gary Wood with us. It's great to have Gary this morning to be able to share with us about the, again, the Southeast or the Cohesive Fire Management Strategy. Gary resides in Smith Mill, North Carolina, and holds an associate degree in Forest Resources Technology and Management from Wayne Community College. Gary spent 31 years working with the U.S. National North Carolina Forest Service in various positions across North Carolina. Prior to his retirement, Gary served as the Wildland Mitigation Specialist, where he worked promoting the FireWise program, performing community and home risk assessment, and administering a wildfire mitigation grant program to communities. So he's been a member of incident management teams, serving in as a qualified information officer, liaison officer, safety officer, and structural protection specialist. And I'll have to add a personal note, the very first ICS training I ever had, I-300-400 was from Gary Wood. So I appreciate that. In 2015, Gary was hired by the Southern Group of State Foresters to serve as the Southeast Regional Coordinator for the Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. Gary serves as coordinator for the Southeast Regional Strategy Committee for implementation of the Cohesive Fire Management Strategy. He's responsible for providing support in the 13 southern states to local, county, state, tribal, federal, NGO partners, and stakeholders, managing the regional action plan. Gary's also a volunteer firefighter. He served for 25 years as a North Carolina Fire and Rescue Commission certified level 2 firefighter. Also serves as chaplain, board of director, member, and treasurer of the Firefighters Relief Fund for Pine Level Fire Department. So Gary, I'll let you take it away. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Robin. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I sure can. Thank you.
Okay, is my screen set up correct? As you should see the Wildland Fire Leadership Council at the top slide.
Don't see it yet. If you can just go ahead and hit the share button up there and share that.
Yeah, that's what I thought I had done already. Can you see the slide layout now?
Not yet. Give it a minute. Keeps flashing.
It's showing my screen with the presentation in presentation mode. And you're not seeing that?
No. Anybody not seeing it?
Okay. Would you like to go ahead and put it up then, and let's run it so we don't eat up the time?
Okay.
Or if there's something
I can do that.
Recommend.
Sure.
Whatever you want me to do.
Okay, let me pull it up here. I think I got it.
It's the bigger hammer, Gary.
Well, Fred, I always say, and a lot of folks on here hear me say, I have more days that I feel like Fred Flintstone living in a George Jetson world than I do.
There you go.
So I'm gonna try one more time here.
Okay, I've got it here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'll just tell you when to click.
Just tell me when to switch.
All right. Good morning, Gary Wood, Southeastern Regional Coordinator for Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. And first and foremost, one of the reasons that I started in forestry many, many years ago, one of the big influencers was Smokey Bear. So if I say anything negative towards Smokey, it's not that I personally disagree with Smokey a whole lot on a lot of things, because like I say, he was my icon, my idol. and a lot of reason why I went into forestry. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide a quick orientation of the National Cohesive Wildfire Management Strategy and how wildfire prevention fits into it. It's a unique challenge and situation to be in. Are we good, Robin? It's a unique situation to be in when, you know, we need to get fire upon our landscape more than we ever have because it's an essential natural process for our forest and rangelands. But in fire prevention, we have to focus that the goal of fire prevention is to prevent unwanted human-caused fires. So having a good solid framework to guide you is critical in being able to do both and achieve outcome-based results. And the cohesive strategy was designed to take a holistic approach to the future of wildfire management, of which prevention of unwanted human-caused fires is a very important part of. And the cohesive strategy organizations and partners are guided by a set of national and regional science-based assessments and strategic action plans, which were on that previous slide. It showed those three slides, or those three plans, where the national plan was thought of. Then it led to development of regional input and development of a regional action plan, which is what actually wound up writing our national action plan. So as you'll see a little bit later in the presentation, fire prevention is a component of this wildfire strategy, and it's expected to help make an impact on lessening wildfire occurrence and impacts to human life from wildfire. On this slide, you see that it talks about all hands, all lands, and this is the vision of the cohesive wildfire management strategy. And it's an approach to reducing long-standing and widespread wildfire risk through restoring and maintaining landscapes, assisting communities to become more fire adapted, as well as ensuring a safe, effective, risk-based response for our firefighters. Next slide, please. So here's a little brief history of the cohesive strategy. It was developed in response to the FLAME Act of 2009, and that FLAME was an acronym for the Federal Land Assistance Management and Enhancement Act, and it required the secretaries for the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Interior to submit a report to Congress with recommendations described in some recent reports that had come out of the Government Accountability Office. And so in developing the National Cohesive Wildfire Management Strategy, those departments focused on those recommendations from the GAO to analyze three things. And those recommendations were: first, potential approaches for addressing the growing wildfire threat. Second was estimated costs associated with approach. And then thirdly, potential benefits and drawbacks associated with each approach. So if you see here, it's brief history. It shows in 2011 when our regional strategy committee was formed. A whole lot of science, a lot of research, a lot of discussion, stakeholder meetings, inputs got us to where we're at now when the actual strategy was released in 2014. If you see on there under 2023 under planning, it talks about cohesive strategy refresh or cohesive strategy addendum. A lot of you probably saw a press release that went out yesterday where that addendum was just released. And so like any plan that you have, you got to update it, and that's what that was. So the great thing about, you know, this cohesive strategy is that the federal agencies realize that wildfire knows no boundaries nor jurisdictions. So they reached out to state, tribal, local, and NGOs to help develop the strategy so that it truly is all hands, all lands. Next slide, please, Robin. So when we look at the cohesive strategy, it was actually built from a top-down and bottom-up approach. Like I said, science data, a risk analysis report of our region was done, and this helped us identify what our individual regional risks were to hopefully be able to allow us to address the wildfire situation that we have. The great thing about it is, you know, the federal government realized that, okay, this was directed to these two secretaries, but wildfire knows no boundaries, it knows no jurisdictions. So that's where they reached out to receive input from state, tribal, federal, other federal agencies, NGO organizations, locals, etc. And so it truly is, an all hands, all lands approach. And just within our region, we reached out and had input back from 160 plus agencies and organizations. Next slide. So when we look at the challenges at the bottom of this slide, it shows the 4 identified challenges that impact or affect wildland fire. Of course, safe and effective response to wildfires is the highest priority of the national strategy, and it includes enhancing wildfire response preparedness with an emphasis on both structural and wildland fire, so that it maximizes the effectiveness of our initial attack response. That second priority is over in the vegetation and fuels management, and it's perhaps the one that's most challenging. General guidance in this area is going to include designing and prioritizing fuel treatments, strategically placing those, increasing the use of wildland fire where you can for management resource objectives, and then continuing in the use of all methods to improve the resiliency of our forest and our landscapes. And then when we take a look at our other challenge that was identified there, is that it shows that homes, communities was the third one, and it talks about really engaging the homeowners and engaging the communities and taking proactive action to work on their situation before fires occur. And then the fourth priority is what we're talking about, is within human-caused emissions, and emphasizing programs and activities tailored to meet what your identified local needs are, which is what Cheryl and Maureen talked about earlier, to try to help prevent human-caused ignitions. And we know we've got a high number of those in our region, so prevention is a very critical thing for us to try to help to use to promote change and mitigate our fire occurrence. Next slide. So the cohesive strategy evaluates the wildfire risk across the country and identifies national and regional priorities to help meet those 3 goals by using the best available science. We heard that previously in the presentation that Maureen and Cheryl did about utilizing science. So the 3 biggest challenges became the 3 goals of the cohesive strategy. And overlap of those 3 goals, you see the goals over on the left and then on the right, where those circles are interlapping there, is that when you do something with one of them, it should have an impact on the other, but at the same time, they've all got to be supported by sound science. And we've got to have collaboration and partnerships there. And we also have to have timely communications about those. So you look at resilient landscapes, regardless of the jurisdictional boundaries of what's going on, all those boundaries are resilient to fire, insects, disease, invasive species, and climate change disturbances in accordance with what other management objectives are laid out for that area. And then with the fire adapted communities, we know that human populations and infrastructure need to be as prepared as possible to receive, respond to, and recover from wildland fire. And then with our wildfire response and the third goal, all jurisdictions should be able to participate in making and implementing safe, effective, efficient, risk-based wildland fire management decisions. Next slide. So we've got those 3 goals. Everything is based around science and, most importantly, consistent and timely communications. A little bit about how the cohesive strategy organization is laid out. The Wildland Fire Leadership Council, they set the vision, the strategy, and expectation for cohesive strategy implementation to hopefully address a broader land management issues. It's made up of 19 national level agency and organization leaders from federal, state, tribal, local, and non-governmental organizations, and it usually meets quarterly. Then each region, as you see on the map, has a regional strategy committee. That's what I help coordinate for us here in the Southeast. And it's made up of federal, state, tribal, local, non-governmental organizations, very similar to what makes up the WIFLIT, but it's usually a lot broader. Ours is, and has a little bit more of a mix of active partners and stakeholders in the region. And we all meet usually online virtually with our regions. Luckily, I have the U.S. Forest Service Region 8 footprint. My counterpart in the West, Katie, she has, I think, 6 different U.S. Forest Service regions that she has to coordinate and work with, so I'm very blessed there. Next slide. So with our regional strategy committee, talking about the makeup of it and being a little bit broader mix, we have over 40 organizations. A lot of these folks or organizations were what helped identify our risk analysis phase. And then we've added additional partners and stakeholders as we needed them. We've got 3 co-chairs and 3 vice co-chairs who represent state, federal, tribal, and NGO of the Regional Strategy Committee, and we just completed a big overhaul of our structure and firmed up our membership a little bit. And we meet virtually every month. We have folks give presentations and topics on items of importance to us. We try to discuss them and see where we can hopefully move some efforts or initiatives forward. And we also form work groups when we need to take on specific action items. Next slide. Early on in the regional cohesive strategy science analysis, they found that there were 5 key values of importance to folks at the South. Now, these here on the left are not in any particular order. They're just randomly placed there, but those were the 5 key items that folks in the South said were very important to them. And those 5 factors helped drive us to create the 153 item regional action plan that we have around those 5 values. Some of those are cross value actions that we know combining and working on those can have the greatest impact for us. And it also, we identified some barriers and critical success factors that I'm pleased to say we've been able to overcome some of those, as well as strategic opportunities to work on. So one thing to think about in your fire prevention messaging, how can you tie it into these 5 key values of importance to folks here in the South? It might help you when crafting those messages. Next slide. So one of the things that our strategy committee did was we created a task force, a work group. And if you see at the top, it talks about in our Southeast Regional Action Plan, the 104th task in there, stated work with Fire Adapted Communities Coalition to target and regionalize tools and messages created at the national level. So what we did was created a work group. We got permission from the folks with Fire Adapted Communities, with Firewise, and we went in and took the National Fire Adapted Communities Guide and created it so that it is specific to the Southeast. And the biggest thing that we did, we took all of the pictures out in there that showed the Northern Rockies or the Desert Southwest or California, and all of the photos in there are specific to the Southeast. And we all know what it's like when you're giving a presentation trying to stress a fact, but the people in the audience are like, well, that don't look nothing like it does around here. You know, is that really going to happen? So this helps overcome that. So that's one of the things that we were successful in being able to do. Next slide. So we've got the 3 goals of cohesive strategy, and I know Gwen Bevins many years ago taught me about the 3 E's and the A's of fire prevention. And so with the 3 goals of the cohesive strategy, they identify opportunities to reduce wildfire risk, and they help establish national priorities focused on achieving those national goals, and are basically the framework. That's what the cohesive strategy is a framework or a foundation for how we must approach the wildland fire challenges. You think about it, the fact, impact, the landscapes, the safe response, those are the key things, the key foundational things to addressing the nation's wildland fire issues. Well, when you look at the 3 E's and the A's of prevention, one of the important pieces of those is reaching out to the public and ensuring that there's a strong understanding of the message that you're trying to convey. So within each of the E and A categories, there's several guiding principles to follow. And while the general message is going to be that all prevention programs need to use a variety of methods and sources to capture the attention and interest of the public, we've all got to try to do that to promote social change and hopefully understanding that it's important to understand how each of these activities are crucial to wildfire prevention. These too must be science-based and have consistent and timely communications, just like the goals of the cohesive strategy. Next slide. So when we look at the 3 E's in the A of fire prevention and the 3 goals of cohesive strategy, they all have an intersect with wildland fire prevention and management. And we've got to be able to be proactive. We've got to think broadly about the challenges that we are faced with and try to look for opportunities to implement the tasks that support the goals of both wildfire prevention and the cohesive strategy. We've got to look to partner with others of who can help to collaborate and influence and promote our efforts at addressing our wildfire crisis. So in my mind, prevention also has got to be an all hands and all lands approach. Next slide. So in the cohesive strategy management options, in that national strategy, in the national action plan, there were management options that were created, and those are designed to be used by anybody to support and emphasize their programs, such as wildfire prevention. And in the 2014 national strategy, it had 19 management options, and 7 of those that supported the fire adapted communities goal. And there were 2 management options specifically focused on wildfire prevention. And with the recently released cohesive strategy addendum, which is a refresh of this 2014 strategy, those items were also continued to be included in there and have risen as major impacts to wildfire management. And so overall, in those total management options where there originally were 19, there were 15 new management options added, which gives us a total of 34. And so some of the observations about driving these options are that, programs that target the prevention of human-caused ignitions have the potential to substantially affect wildfire occurrence and extent in essentially every county in the nation. And there's a need to support fire prevention educational efforts as well as develop adequate and enforceable state and local ordinances related to wildfire prevention. But we've not been very successful with the ordinances here in the South, so we probably have to try to take a different approach to making that impact. And there's clear evidence that small investments in fire prevention help reduce the cost of fire suppression as well as associated wildfire damages. And that goes back to the information Cheryl and Maureen talked about, with Jeff Preston's work, in that for every dollar you spend in fire prevention, it saves you $35 in suppression costs. And then also programs that are effective when they focus on the underlying causes of the human-caused ignitions in each location and tailor the prevention programs to specific casual factors and community dynamics. And that goes right back to what Maureen and Cheryl were talking about this morning, and focusing and targeting where those actions take place. Next slide. So this goes and shows the management options as they were listed in the 2014 strategy, and it shows the focus for human-caused ignitions and also mentions codes and ordinances. And like I said, we've not had a real big influence with some of the codes and ordinances, although I know that the city of Austin, Texas is the only one I know of that has really taken the WUI codes and have ordinances in place that now address their building and construction codes locally there. But in the cohesive strategy refresh, it does continue to mention human-caused ignitions. One thing that it does expand out is under that reduced accidental human-caused ignitions. It also includes adding in there those that may occur from electrical systems, which you've heard about all the issues in the West with those. And we still have some broken power lines with trees on bad days here in the South. So, the 2014 version had it in there about reducing human-caused ignitions, and it's in the new one as well. Next slide. So how does prevention fit in with cohesive strategy? Now that you got a little understanding of the background of the cohesive strategy and some of the overlap, in addition to the national strategy, U.S. Forest Service, they have their national wildfire prevention strategy. And I think that Maureen and Cheryl have been working to try to update that. But like the cohesive strategy, it emphasizes the value of collaboration. And you can see here the first bullet there that's highlighted about be guided by the current national fire management initiatives, with the cohesive strategy being listed there. But at the same time, it also includes several national goals that are consistent with the cohesive strategy. And it shows there wildfire prevention being an inter and intra-agency process, and that it's driven and supported by science, scientific research to be specific, and then also that you try to integrate fire prevention into all fire management functions. And that's where I think we can do a better job, is trying to really maybe ramp up and build more fire prevention into our incident management teams. As we're going out to fires, help beef up that particular section of it. And I've had that conversation with Maureen and Cheryl as well in the past. Next slide. So what I'm attempting to do here is illustrate how the national strategies and goals are intended to guide how wildfire management activities, such as those carried out by all of you as prevention specialists, can and should support the national cohesive strategy as well as those wildfire prevention goals. Click, please. So this illustration is just a snapshot of the whole overall wildfire management system. All of this information, all these things are what go into that national wildfire management system. On the left, you've got the national goals that drive the programs, which in turn are implemented by different sets of activities and are out delivered by specialists, folks with special skills, funding, and they've got to be supported by science-based information and tools, as well as you've got to have effective partnerships there in place and collaboration and outreach and education. All of that working to deliver the desired wildfire management outcomes, which we know are incorporated and represented by the three goals of the cohesive strategy. So to be effective, activities, programs, and goals have got to be interconnected in the wildfire management system. Click, please. So for example, you can see that these national fire prevention goals are integrated in the wildfire management system, and it goes back to some of those goals in that national prevention plan that you're doing it from an intra and intra-agency process, as well as being driven by scientific research, and you've got to integrate it in all of those functions of the fire management system. And another key point too is that the way our activities should be selected should come from our regional, state, and local planning efforts, like your state forest action plans, your national forest land management plans, your CWPPs, any type of our cohesive strategy regional action plans, as well as other local plans that are ideally based on regional and state wildfire assessments. And I'm not going to gig it too hard, but for our folks in the Southeast, we have determined that utilizing our South Wrap site promotes a better picture for us than using the wildfirerisk.org site. And I won't get on my soapbox there, but there are some good components in the wildfirerisk.org site, but we encourage you to use the South Wrap, or for our folks in like Texas and Florida that have developed more specific text wrap, etc. So next slide. We sometimes have to stop and ask ourselves, are we preventing or are we mitigating? And for those that haven't heard about Burner Bob and Friends, he's generated by the Longleaf Initiative to promote prescribed fire and the work that they do on ecosystem restoration landscapes with prescribed fire. So next slide. as we continue to ask ourselves, are we doing wildfire prevention or wildfire mitigation? They both are aimed at lessening the risk of the public to the impacts and exposure to wildfire, and they both strive to reduce risk and hazards for wildfire suppression personnel. So maybe doing business the way we've always done it in some of our suppression tactics, et cetera, may be great, but when it comes to suppress our prevention skills and as well as our mitigation skills, we've got to be able to maybe think outside the box, be proactive, and make sure it's beneficial. So, we can't continue to invest all of our resources and dollars into suppression of equipment, suppression forces, and strategies. And we have to move and change to where we're more reactive, with our suppression programs. And that must be where we have a proactive fire management program that effectively applies fire prevention as well as hazardous fuel reduction techniques in there to not only reduce unwanted ignitions, but it's also going to minimize those damages and personnel exposure from wildfires, not only for firefighters, but for the public as well. So where's all the dollars going that we're hearing coming down the pipes? Next slide. So a few take-home messages that we can share and talk about is we know the wildfire problem in the country is immense and that we all play an important part in trying to take a balanced approach to solving the problem. And, we can't suppress our way out of the wildfire problem. That's just not an option. We see that it's not working. So we've got to be strategic, we got to be purposeful, and we have to prioritize the work that we do to make sure it's done in the areas of highest risk. And so this goes back to utilizing those tools. Maureen and Cheryl mentioned the Wildfire Risk Site, SouthRAP, CWPPs, your state forest action plans. You can utilize those to help identify where to do the most good, to have the most benefit from, to help with prioritizing those strategic actions that you take. We talk a lot about collaboration and partnerships, and that's really the key to cohesive strategy. And I feel like that's a huge key in success that can be built upon with our fire prevention efforts, because we need to maximize our collective partnership to integrate our work with other programs and activities to achieve the desired outcomes that are represented within our 3 cohesive strategy goals, as well as our 3 E's and our A's. So I challenge you to ask yourself, who can I partner with to help increase the benefits of the work I'm doing? And we do this a lot in cohesive strategy. We ask ourselves, who's missing, who's not at the table that needs to be here, and who can help? And that goes back to that all hands, all lands, and trying to help and build in capacity. And we know that we can't afford to be doing random acts of prevention or mitigation, that we've got to work with collaborative partnerships, reach out to those new partners and stakeholders, and include them in the planning and the messaging around wildland fire. And I stress that, if in this day and time and with the social media aspects of things, if you're not messaging and working with some of these partners collaboratively, they may be taking your messages and putting them out there, but they may not be putting them out in the correct manner or text that they need to be. And so, that's a challenge as well. Next slide. So one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to be able to prioritize, where we need to invest our time and our resources, and prioritize what our actions and our messages are to give us the most return to be successful. And so, what tools are you using to help identify where and what you need to be doing? And does this involve others, or do we need to partner with another agency or jurisdiction to meet our objectives? And what is the risk and what will the benefit be? So to be successful, we've got to be able to strive for outcome-based activities and approaches instead of focusing solely on the output. It's great to be able to show that you did a certain number of fire prevention programs, but what did they produce? What impact did they have? This can be difficult because it's hard to determine how many fires you prevented from starting when they don't start. And your arsonists aren't going to call you up and say, hey, I was in a meeting and heard a presentation the other day, and I decided I wasn't going to set that fire I wanted to set today. So it's hard to measure that, but we've got to strive to be able to look at what those outcome-based approaches are. And, I took some time to think about this and looking at partnerships, how we can do more, the challenges we're facing, and being old school. I've been in this, since back in the 1980s, and think about how things have changed, how prevention messaging has changed, how the way we deliver things have changed in the past 30 plus years. But, as an example of, we've got to be able to try to build partnerships and collaborate. There's a county here in North Carolina, and they have, I think it's 3 full-time Forest Service staff there. They've got 119 elementary schools in their county. So how do you deliver messaging in that many schools with so few folks to do it? So who else can help? Are the fire departments doing stuff? What about their fire and life safety educator staff? Or a lot of your departments now, you hear them talk about community risk reduction specialists or their titles. Are they providing prevention messaging? And I ask myself sometimes, is our prevention program focusing on the school-age kids still valid in this situation? Would it be more beneficial if we created adult-focused messaging? While it might still be beneficial in some areas to pass out the smoky coloring sheets and crayons and pencils and rulers, those are all great tools. But how many kids do you see when they go out with mom and dad somewhere that they pull out a coloring book and a box of crayons and the kid sits there and colors and draws? Most of them have a tablet or a cell phone planted in their face, and they're watching video games or movies. So some of the things that I think about when I look here in our region, and then I look at other parts of the country, is I'm not aware that we have a lot of what people are terming, fire safe councils, like a county fire safe council. It's a small organized group of folks that work around prevention and mitigation. And, there may have a wide variety of backgrounds, but, could they be more beneficial in helping us get more of that prevention messaging out? And then one of the other things that I ask of you is, are you talking with your county public health departments about vulnerable populations regarding smoke and air quality? Are you working with your state air quality folks in messaging when you've got fires, promoting the EPA Air Now Wildfire and Smoke info, those type things. You see that our local meteorologists are doing a better job now than they have in the past on wildfire messaging, during high fire danger, encouraging folks to not burn and stuff. So that's working, but is that an avenue where you could help work and get some additional messaging in that? And then also, how is your message getting out there? Is it hitting those communities that, aren't English speaking? We have a wide variety of backgrounds in our country now, a wide variety here in the Southeast as well. So is that messaging getting there in the appropriate way that it needs to go there? And so this might require additional partnerships as well. But, like it says up here, we've got to be able to get ahead of wildfire, and we can't do it individually. We've got to drop those silos. We've got to work beyond our normal jurisdictions and boundaries to be able to address the nation's wildfire problem. And that will help promote and let us support the goals of the cohesive strategy, as well as work with the 3 E's and the A's of prevention. Next slide. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I hope that you've gained some insight into the cohesive wildfire management strategy and how fire prevention is an important part in addressing the nation's wildfire crisis. So if we continue to incorporate the elements of the cohesive strategy along with the guiding principles we see in fire prevention, combining those together and collaborate with others, we hope that we'll be able to achieve great success in minimizing the occurrence of wildfires as well as reducing the impacts in the U.S., to our public and especially our firefighter responders. So our National Cohesive Strategy Workshop, the sixth one that we're going to hold, will be in Santa Fe, New Mexico, November 6th through 10. I invite you to join us there. You can look at the International Association of Wildland Fires website. They help us logistically host and sponsor this, and I encourage you to take a look there and consider participating and attending. My contact here is at the bottom, and Robin, I think I've got just a couple of minutes for a few questions if there are any, and I've not been monitoring the chat, so.
Okay, thank you, Gary. We'll take a look at the chat here.
While we're waiting, if anybody is thinking of a question, I really hate that I can't find a photo, because when I was a small child, we were at the Washington Zoo in Washington, D.C. at the National Zoo, and I've got a picture of me standing there, and in the background you can see the original first Smokey Bear in his little village area there, and I got to put my hands on that and find it so I can use it in presentations.
Smokey and Goldie there at the National Zoo.
Yep.
Caroline Ritchie had a comment. She said on mitigation versus prevention, she posted an image that uses a lot about prescribed burning as wildfire mitigation. It's also a great resource from Climate Central. So that's there for folks to access if they'd like. And then there's also a Climate Central report on prescribed burning that she also posted.
Climate Central will be coming out with another article in the near future, because we just did an interview with them last week related and talking about wildfire and climate's impacts on it. And, the cohesive strategy addendum, the 2014 strategy didn't address climate change. It intentionally didn't, because at that time, 2010 to 2014, the term climate change was not very politically correct like it is now. And so that's one of the big updates, is really looking at this climate impact on us from wildfire and the new addendum. And I'll provide that to you, Robin, later today, and maybe a few other things that folks would like to take a peek at.
That'd be great. Just email those to me and I'll be glad to share with the group.
Certainly.
Lucinda Nolan says, looks like we need a wildfire prevention game for iPads and iPhones.
Wish I was
Probably,
smart enough to.
Yeah, no kidding.
Hey, Hannah Thompson, Wes, y'all might need to work on the Epic Games guy that's based here in North Carolina, see if he can create that for y'all.
Definitely.
He's a big proponent of landscape resiliency and maintaining lands. Gwen said Fred Turk had one that he'd share.
Yeah, Fred just shared a Smoky Scouts site there. Smoky for Kids, Smoky Scouts. So take a look at that.
Cool deal.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you being with us, Gary, and you'll be joining us toward the end of the conference as well to provide some wrap up and closing comments.
Most definitely.
We sure appreciate it.
Y'all done a great job putting a very good agenda together, and I look forward to being with y'all throughout the week.
Okay.